dad had a fairly aggressive personality, although he could be passive on some things too. But normally he was pretty aggressive with his kids and stuff. You know, he's a pretty strict parent. And, you know, he gave me advice throughout my life. He kind of encouraged me not to take some risks that I wanted to take. And I guess I'll never know whether or not, you know, I should have done that. And the truth is, I'm not very good at seeing things through, projects and stuff. I don't know how well I would have done on my own if I would have been able to find the self-discipline to run my own business. So I kind of wonder what certain things he discouraged me about. He discouraged me against getting into recording, you know. He didn't encourage me anyway. We've always been Michiganders. But my sister took a job after she graduated, you know, med school and all. Got her first real permanent job. So she settled down in Indiana, middle of Indiana. Which cost us a lot of travel and time for us and her husband's relatives. I kind of wonder if it was a good idea. She thought it would be an easier job, but man, if she'd taken that job in Ann Arbor, things would have been a lot easier for the families, that's for sure. I think it would have been better for the kids, too. Had a better, well, it worked out okay for them, I suppose. So anyways, I'm headed down south to visit my mom, visit my sister for Easter, stay in the old house a few days, do a little repair and clean up. My mom's still alive, but she's never going to be able to go back into a big house like that and take care of herself, or even a little house to take care of herself. She really needed that extra care she's getting. Like I said, she's doing pretty well where she's at. Physically, she's pretty healthy. She could go a few more years. But now she's dealing with the grief of having lost her husband. And they were kind of a heckle. There's a cartoon. I'm trying to think of the name of the cartoon. The two characters were always bickering at each other. They had a pretty intense relationship at times. And they always were nagging at each other. But, you know, their marriage survived at least a little affair on my mom's part. I have no idea how serious that was. So their marriage survived a long time, despite all the bickering and tension between them. I think at some point they just didn't know anything else, you know. And, you know, it's good to have somebody with you when you're old. Like I said, they didn't take care of each other that well, though. But just having company and someone to call the ambulance. I'll probably be found alone someday and a cat or dog eating me. That's what my friend Paul always says. Die alone at home and have her dogs eat her. Makes you wonder a lot about life, you know, and if there is a purpose. What's the purpose? What's really achieved, especially if you lose all your memories anyway. Your memories and your personality maybe recycled. Or do elements of you get recycled, as some Buddhists think. You dissolve into the ocean. All the work my dad did putting gardens together, woodwork and everything else he did. Well, death comes to everyone. That's one thing we all have in common. We all lose people. Well, every home, every family moves on. First, their little dog died. Well, actually, first was my mom. She didn't die, but she's had to be put in a home. So that was the first. Then their little dog died. And Dad was already in the hospital at that point when he got that news. And then it was just a steady downward thing for my dad. It's hard to think that like 6 months ago or whatever, Christmas, the last Christmas we had together, my mom was still in the house, my dad was still in the house, dog was still alive. I got a picture of the three of them on the couch snoozing together. It was kind of a cute picture. But yeah, a few short months later, less than a year later, the three are gone. Well, my mom isn't gone, but she's kind of half gone. Gone from this place. Like me, he struggled with keeping things organized and neat. This is a little thing he snagged somewhere. It's kind of cute. It's got a little spot at the bottom for alcohol. Somebody's little thing there. Dad kind of liked that secret stuff, hidden alcohol stashes and stuff. He wasn't a drinker, that much of a drinker. Didn't have any secret alcohol stashes around the house or anything. But he kind of liked things like that, secrets. Sure, he picked this up somewhere. He was going to probably restore it, fix that missing piece there. But it's just another example of his trappings of religion, styles of religion. So he had an odd respect for religion in general, I'd say. He married a nun, an ex-nun. So I lived with my grandfather for a short period of time. Once we'd moved to Canton, and I wanted to finish up in Dearborn High, so I lived here with my grandpa, which ultimately didn't work out. I ended up spending my last year in Canton. The year before that, I spent with my grandfather. My senior year, though, I had to go to a different high school. At any rate, I was getting to my dad and his career as a pediatrician. And he had a lot of people who really loved him, and a lot of enthusiastic people. I was kind of surprised to learn that it wasn't his first calling. He was actually going to be an engineer, he thought at first. Which is probably why he stirred me towards engineering. And the third I forgot to mention was my father's sister, my aunt. She was 101. Someone was calling her 102, but they were looking forward to her next birthday, which sadly isn't going to happen. My dad also died at 96. He was 1 month away from his 97th. I learned a little bit about my dad from family conversations and stuff. My grandfather had taken me aside and shown me some clippings way back when I was living with him. My dad had actually had some things he'd never talked about that my grandfather showed him. My grandfather was a little bit proud that my father stood up for himself. He was a bit of a conscientious objector for the war. He didn't want to kill anybody. He ended up being thrown in the medical court. That was kind of his introduction to medicine. And after the war, he became a pediatrician. So before that, he had been aiming to be an engineer. That's kind of why he focused me in that direction, I believe. But yeah, medical wasn't his first choice. Engineering was. But the old Uncle Sam had different ideas for my father. And my father found meaning in medicine. Found that he could achieve things. He discovered a little epidemic of TB occurring in a ward. It's one of the early things. Dog runner still in place with its leash. Doggy only recently gone. We always had pets growing up, and Dad always took us on trips, even short walks by the nearby river. We lived near the Rouge River in Dearborn. He'd take us there quite often, sometimes even with his grandfather, or our grandfather rather, his father, in the early days. And of course he taught us our love of skiing pretty much. He got us into skiing early, into cross-country skiing early as well. So in general, he was a creative person. He liked to garden, liked to do drawings, carving, woodwork. It's kind of a shame we don't have more of his drawings and his paintings, though. I think he was a little bit shy about them or something. He did some watercolors for his class. He did some nice birds, which the neighbor saw, and she told me about it, but I had never seen him around the house. He never showed them to me. So I don't know what happened to the birds he painted. Then after that class, he didn't really do any more with it. He set up a little thing, a little studio for watercoloring, and he never got it really continued on. But he was pretty old at that point. So I'm kind of jumping around here. Anyways, he left Michigan to be with his grandchildren. My parents had moved to Indiana, along with my sister and her family, when she took a position as a rheumatologist. So they moved out here too, just to be with their grandchildren, help raise the grandchildren, which they did for many years. So I suppose it was probably worth it for them for that, I guess. I was trying to think of some words to sum up my father, some adjectives. I guess I'd say he was honest, but he was cautious, and he could be quite critical. He was sort of conservative, not really in the political sense we have today. He wasn't really, he wasn't a Trumper or anything. Yet he was pretty socially conservative. And of course that was buffeted by many things in life. Less than a month later, his sister died. She was over 100, only a month after he had died. I kind of wonder about that, how things go. My grandfather and his brother both died in the same hospital on the same day, pretty much the same time. And they'd been feuding all their lives. They weren't in the same room or anything. They were in different parts of the hospital. And they'd come in on different days. But they both ended up at the same hospital. And my Uncle Pete really wasn't that bad. My grandpa had been going downhill for a long time, but Uncle Pete really was more or less doing okay, I thought. But yeah, he went to the hospital right after my grandfather went to the hospital, and they both passed the same day. So this is kind of like that. It's my father and his sister dying within a month of each other. Throwing the dog, immediately before. I want to say a few words about Marie. She was over 100. I really regret getting to see her. I used to see her at my cousin's summer get-togethers he had every summer for the longest time. The last several years he stopped having them. And that's probably the last time I saw my aunt, Marie. I should have made a case, found out exactly where she was staying and what room number and all the goodies and details of visiting her. That's my fault for not doing that. Unfortunately, my visits to the Detroit area are really brief when I do go. I don't really have a place to stay in my own little house I own half of there. So when I go to the metro area, it's usually a pretty quick day trip, do my visit and then leave to avoid, motel or sleeping on the floor of my living room. My Aunt Marie was extremely conservative, pretty much influenced by her husband, who was very conservative as well. Even though he worked for Social Security, that was always kind of a rub everybody noticed. He worked for the biggest social program, although he was really against all that stuff. Anyway, we got in a little bit of clash, and I never really got close to her. I guess I never really was. But we had a little clash over abortion, and she was very adamant about life beginning at the moment of conception, the hardline anti-abortion people. Whereas I was saying, the life doesn't start until the soul enters the body. The soul is not a biological byproduct of a sex act. That argument didn't go anywhere with her. So, like his paintings, he never posted any of his drawings on the walls in a frame or anything like that. In fact, most of his drawings were thrown away with the daily paper. He would draw faces and stuff like that just right on the newsprint. Right across the newsprint. He'd imitate a face that was in the newspaper, or he'd imitate a face for a shape or something from a magazine, or some interesting texture he wanted to draw. So very few of them were on something that could be saved. Most, like I said, were on newsprint, the daily paper. And it was almost every day he'd have something, on the paper drawn. A huge volume of stuff he drew. And studied drawing, and he drew a lot of faces. He'd see an interesting face in the newspaper, he would draw right next to that face, right on the newspaper itself, an image of that face a little larger, just to see if he could capture that face. But he'd draw other things too, mostly faces, but an interesting object or such. But this is the only thing I found that I could really save. And he had all kinds of drawing stuff. He's got tracing paper, he's got different sets of pencils, different hardnesses and stuff. He had all this stuff. He did a lot of it. But not to save any of it. It's kind of odd. He didn't want to put his stuff forward. I don't really know why. So my dad was pretty conservative style-wise too. He pretty much wore the same stuff all his life, as far as I can tell. He never grew a beard, not even once. He never had a mustache. He didn't like jazz. He called rock jazz another form of jazz, kind of dismissed rock as well. I guess he tolerated the folk music and the show tune music my sisters used to listen to. And he listened to some German music from way back in the day. Stuff that reminded him of his childhood in Moldorf, where he lived part of his life. He was born in the U.S., but then he moved there and moved back again. He was pretty sharp to the end, but he was very tech avoidant. I kind of regret that he wouldn't let me show him something on the computer. He thought it was more complicated. You always make it more complicated than it really is. The computers are meant to be easy to use, but it's kind of intimidating, I suppose.